My name is Masood. I'm a PhD student at UIC. I'll be presenting our work evaluating one of Google's Privacy Sandbox proposals. This work is primarily done by Giuseppe, who's a friend, and he was a master's student last year at UIC. He's since graduated and is working from New Jersey. It was done also with the help of our advisor, Jason, who is staying back in Greece to spend more time with his dog, Chico. So let's get started. I'm going to use, actually essentially copy a slide from 8 years ago at USENIX, which dealt also with advertising and targeting of users. And the reason I'm reusing this slide is just to show that we have come a long way, but we have underlying the same fundamental problem as before, which is what we've been discussing, including in the previous talk. When you use your web browser to go and visit a bunch of sites, these sites include a bunch of other libraries that try to serve targeted advertisements to you. Each of these may be independent, but they also have overlaps, and they're able to do this across sites primarily through the use and exchange of third-party cookies, some of which happens within the browser that you could catch with link decoration, but also some of this happens in the background. All of this depends on a very basic fundamental concept that I'm sure a lot of you are aware of, but I'll just reiterate it just to show how things are slightly changing. So with real-time bidding, if you go and visit a publisher, say CNN, New York Times, any of these publishers, they have ad spaces that sellers try to contact advertisers and request for bids. Based on the amount of information these advertisers have, they serve you a targeted advertisement, and all of it comes down to the use of cookies. This online advertising ecosystem that primarily relies on real-time bidding has these auctions run for each ad space. So even if you have a single page, you have multiple ad spaces, each of those require different auctions, and here it incentivizes advertisers which have the maximum amount of information for you. It basically incentivizes the sharing of third-party cookies and as much information as they have or they can gain. Per a report from IAB, as of 2023, they reached a record high of $225 billion, and this just keeps growing. In just between 2022 and 2023, they saw the highest jump for any year, and even with all of the restrictions that are proposed, they still strongly project growth for this year, which we'll learn about next year. As a result, Google's been working on a bunch of proposals through the Privacy Sandbox. They've been trying to limit this by completely deprecating third-party cookies. I'll get to updates on it towards the end of the slide. But they've also proposed a bunch of other APIs, because with the deprecation of third-party cookies, it's not just advertising, but it's analytics, it's authentication, it's a bunch of other services that they're trying to supplement that would have otherwise lost out on functionality without third-party cookies. And in this talk, I'll be focusing on our work on their mechanism to replace real-time bidding through the protected audience API, but I'll call it FLEDGE, which is their old name, so that's a little easier. The way advertising with FLEDGE changes things is if you say just go to a shopping site before you're actually served an advertisement, an embedded advertiser can just say, hey, this guy's looking for specific sneakers. I'm going to store information about this particular sneaker so that at a later point, if they come back and I identify them, I'm going to show them an ad for that sneaker so that they buy it. So later on, when you visit, say, New York Times or CNN, and you have that same bidding that happens for each ad space that had happened in real-time bidding that I'd shown before, these advertisers basically look at the interest groups and then show you the advertisement based on stuff that's already stored in the browser. But while that looks very easy, the things on the left and the things on the right are a bunch of other mechanisms that the browsers did not need to worry about before. But now real-time bidding is essentially been served and mediated, managed by the browser. So you have a bunch of new APIs, you have a new storage space, they need to make sure all these advertisers have different places to go and bid within the browser. And also each of these advertisers need support for very secure servers. They need support for real-time updates to their interest groups. They need to have support for temporary mechanisms. All of this is additional infrastructure that did not exist before, and that basically creates a bunch of problems that we found out and we eventually discussed in the paper. FLEDGE, just to give an overview following the example, is essentially real-time bidding, but this time it's browser supported. So advertisers, while they would previously use third-party cookies, they're going to be using their interest groups that they're already stored in your browser. Fundamentally, as a replacement for third-party cookies, it replaces and limits how much information is shared between advertisers. So if Criteo has some information about you, it bids based on that. If AdNexus has different information about you, it bids on that, but they limit how much information is exchanged between the two. Primarily, when it was proposed in the initial proposal for FLEDGE, there were three primary privacy advancements that Google had promised. The first one being that the browser, in this case, mediates the real-time bidding and has information about users' interests. It's not gone to the advertiser server. These advertisers, when they store these interest groups, they cannot combine it between these advertisers, and they also cannot use it to directly identify whose browser I'm looking at this interest group at. And also, if you visit a website, say CNN or New York Times, those websites do not know what advertisement is eventually sold and what advertisement the user has seen, so they don't learn anything about the user either. These privacy advancements are great, but given FLEDGE, we found a total of 12 attacks. These include 6 tracking attacks that basically help you store and read a unique identifier for the user. We found a way to leak sensitive information about the user, and we found 3 different types of service disruptions that would make it very hard or impossible to actually perform targeted advertising within the browser using FLEDGE. These attacks that we found violate all 3 privacy advancements that FLEDGE was initially proposed for. I'll give you an example of each of them. So with tracking, the idea is that when interest groups are the fundamental component that is expected to replace the idea of third-party cookies. And they also, unlike third-party cookies, are like a JSON object. So they store a bunch of information about the interest group. So not just that it's a sneaker, but if we're gonna later on use this in bidding, you're gonna have a lot more helper URLs of where to go and fetch some more code to ensure you have more information during bidding. So I'll give you an example. Say when you visit the same sneaker site and you're going to try and add an interest group, an attacker can essentially add a URL that is intended to be fetched later on when bidding happens. So in this, it's for any WebAssembly code that will be fetched later on. And this gets stored within the browser, and FLEDGE does not enforce any restrictions on that field. So it does not need to make sure that this field is available on a bunch of other browsers. It can be unique to that particular browser instance. Later on in a different session, not even on the same site, if you find the same attacker that tries to run an auction, basically to support that auction, the browser would just go ahead and fetch that interest group and make a request for the same WebAssembly code from the attacker's server, which would include the unique ID and allow the attacker to learn who the browser instances are for. Following that, because I have just 3 minutes, cross-site leaks is one thing that was not previously facilitated by third-party cookies, because to remind you, according to the privacy advancements that it was made for, both the second and third one prevented identifying the user, uniquely sharing information between advertisers, and also letting the website learn exactly what advertisement is served. Interest groups, unlike third-party cookies, now include information that's very sensitive, including which websites the user browsed and what sensitive information was held before. FLEDGE essentially allows sellers of auctions to basically execute decision logic, and a request for that is sent when they're executing the actual auction. So if a seller basically has a precompiled list of sensitive websites, they can run an auction once for each website. And if the browser has seen that the user has only visited 2 of these sites before and not the third one, it allows the seller to basically filter it down and say they visited X and Y, but not Z. Based on that information, basically FLEDGE allows also for attackers to learn which specific ads and what specific associated interests the user is being targeted for. So if they rerun that auction for both the websites that they identified, they'd be able to read the specific ads that the interest groups were going to serve. And this is, again, something that was not possible with third-party cookies. Following this, we also found an attack with DoubleClick, because we had performed a measurement and realized DoubleClick is really one of the largest users of FLEDGE or experimenters of FLEDGE at the time. And we basically exploited FLEDGE's limit on a per origin limit on how many interest groups were possible. And we found a pollution attack that would remove anything that was targeted towards you and fill it up with random DoubleClick interest groups that would basically allow competitors to perform ad fraud and reduce the ability of other advertisers to serve you something that's targeted. As a result of this, we managed to submit all of this to Google. And basically, one thing we'd like to highlight is that there are at least 5 of these attacks that do not have a planned fix. To encourage more research on this, I've just provided a brief timeline that'll take like 30 seconds to show. In 2019, Google announced that they're coming up with Privacy Sandbox, and they started testing a bunch of them in 2021. We've since reported a bunch of them, especially when they were in their experimental phase. And we're not the only ones to do this. Other interested parties have also performed their analysis. There have been other papers, and this is not completely comprehensive, but just gives you an idea that there's a lot of interest in this space. And all of this, despite all of the reports, Google went ahead and made all of the proposals publicly available by default on Chrome browsers. With its initial idea of getting rid of third-party cookies, it's taken multiple steps in which it's delayed their complete deprecation. And just over 3 weeks ago, they rolled back on that and said this is going to be a user choice. So this field is constantly changing. And what I want you to take away from this is primarily that the work that a lot of people are doing is quite effective, and it's also being taken in the right stride. And since it's changing that often, I encourage more people to look into and evaluate these proposals, and especially try hard to make sure we have a more private and secure web. Thank you.